Sir Francis Drake, Vice Admiral, was an English sea captain, privateer, navigator, slaver, and politician of the Elizabethan era. Drake carried out the second circumnavigation of the world, from 1577 to 1580. Elizabeth I of England awarded Drake a knighthood in 1581. He was second in command of the English fleet against the Spanish Armada in 1588. He died of dysentery in January 1596 after unsuccessfully attacking San Juan, Puerto Rico. His exploits were legendary, making him a hero to the English but a pirate to the Spaniards, to whom he was known as El Drac. King Philip II was said to have offered a reward of 20,000 ducats, about £4 a million by modern standards, for his life. Birth and early years. Francis Drake was born in Tavistock, Devon, England. Although Drake's birth is not formally recorded, it is known that he was born while the Six Articles were in force. Drake was 22 when he obtained the command of the Judith. This would date his birth to 1544. A date of c. 1540 is suggested from two portraits, one a miniature painted by Nicholas Hilliard in 1581 when he was allegedly 42, the other painted in 1594 when he was said to be 53. He was the eldest of the 12 sons of Edmund Drake, a Protestant farmer, and his wife Mary Milway. The first son was reportedly named after his godfather Francis Russell, 2nd Earl of Bedford. Because of religious persecution during the Prayer Book Rebellion in 1549, the Drake family fled from Devonshire into Kent. There the father obtained an appointment to minister to men in the King's Navy. He was ordained deacon and made vicar of Upnor Church on the Medway. Drake's father apprenticed Francis to his neighbour, the master of a bark used for coastal trade transporting merchandise to France. The shipmaster was so satisfied with the young Drake's conduct that, being unmarried and childless at his death, he bequeathed the bark to Drake. Marriage and family. Francis Drake married Mary Newman in 1569. She died 12 years later, in 1581. In 1585, Drake married Elizabeth Sydenham, born circa 1562, the only child of Sir George Sydenham, of Combe Sydenham, who was the High Sheriff of Somerset. After Drake's death, the widow Elizabeth eventually married Sir William Courtenay of Powderham. As Sir Francis Drake had no children, his estate and titles passed on to his nephew. Sailing career. At age 23, Drake made his first voyage to the Americas, sailing with his second cousin, Sir John Hawkins, on one of a fleet of ships owned by his relatives, the Hawkins family of Plymouth. In 1568 Drake was again with the Hawkins fleet when it was trapped by the Spaniards in the Mexican port of San Juan de Ulloa. He escaped along with Hawkins. Following the defeat at San Juan de Ulloa, Drake vowed revenge. He made 2 voyages to the West Indies, in 1570 and 1571, of which little is known. In 1572, he embarked on his first major independent enterprise. He planned an attack on the Isthmus of Panama, known to the Spanish as Tierra Firme and the English as the Spanish Main. This was the point at which the silver and gold treasure of Peru had to be landed and sent overland to the Caribbean Sea, where galleons from Spain would pick it up at the town of Nombre de Dios. Drake left Plymouth on May 24, 1572, with a crew of 73 men in 2 small vessels, the Pasha and the Swan, to capture Nombre de Dios. His first raid was late in July 1572. Drake and his men captured the town and its treasure. When his men noticed that Drake was bleeding profusely from a wound, they insisted on withdrawing to save his life and left the treasure. Drake stayed in the area for almost a year, raiding Spanish shipping and attempting to capture a treasure shipment. In 1573, he joined Guillaume Latestou, a French buccaneer, in an attack on a richly laden mule train. Drake and his party found that they had captured around 20 tons of silver and gold. They buried much of the treasure, as it was too much for their party to carry. Wounded, Latestou was captured and later beheaded. The small band of adventurers dragged as much gold and silver as they could carry back across some 18 miles of jungle-covered mountains to where they had left the raiding boats. When they got to the coast, the boats were gone. Drake and his men, downhearted, exhausted and hungry, had nowhere to go and the Spanish were not far behind. At this point Drake rallied his men, buried the treasure on the beach, and built a raft to sail with 2 volunteers 10 miles along the surf-lashed coast to where they had left the flagship. When Drake finally reached its deck, his men were alarmed at his bedraggled appearance. Fearing the worst, they asked him how the raid had gone. Drake could not resist a joke and teased them by looking downhearted. Then he laughed, pulled a necklace of Spanish gold from around his neck and said, "Our voyage is made, lads." By August 9, 1573, he had returned to Plymouth. Circumnavigation of the Earth. With the success of the Panama Isthmus raid, in 1577 Elizabeth I of England sent Drake to start an expedition against the Spanish along the Pacific coast of the Americas. Drake used the plans that Sir Richard Greenville had received the patent for in 1574 from Elizabeth, which was rescinded a year later after protests from Philip of Spain. He set out from Plymouth on November 15, 1577, but bad weather threatened him and his fleet. They were forced to take refuge in Falmouth, Cornwall, from where they returned to Plymouth for repair. After this major setback, he set sail again on December 13, aboard Pelican, with 4 other ships and 164 men. He soon added a 6th ship, Mary, a Portuguese merchant ship that had been captured off the coast of Africa near the Cape Verde Islands. He also added its captain, Nuno da Silva, a man with considerable experience navigating in South American waters. Drake's fleet suffered great attrition. He scuttled both Christopher and the flyboat Swan due to loss of men on the Atlantic crossing. He made landfall at the gloomy Bay of San Julian, in what is now Argentina. Ferdinand Magellan had called here half a century earlier, where he put to death some mutineers. Drake's men saw weathered and bleached skeletons on the grim Spanish gibbets. They discovered that Mary had rotting timbers, so they burned the ship. Following Magellan's example, Drake tried and executed his own mutineer Thomas Doughty. Drake decided to remain the winter in San Julian before attempting the Strait of Magellan. Entering the Pacific, the 3 remaining ships of his convoy departed for the Magellan Strait at the southern tip of South America. A few weeks later Drake made it to the Pacific, but violent storms destroyed one of the 3 ships, the Marigold in the strait, and caused another, the Elizabeth captained by John Winter, to return to England, leaving only the Pelican. After this passage, the Pelican was pushed south and discovered an island which Drake called Elizabeth Island. Drake, like navigators before him, probably reached a latitude of 55° along the Chilean coast. Despite popular lore, it seems unlikely that he reached Cape Horn or the eponymous Drake Passage, because his descriptions do not fit the first and his shipmates denied having seen an open sea. The first report of his discovery of an open channel south of Tierra del Fuego was written after the 1618 publication of the voyage of Willem Schouten and Jacob Le Maire around Cape Horn in 1616. He pushed onwards in his lone flagship, now renamed the Golden Hind in honor of Sir Christopher Hatton. The Golden Hind sailed north along the Pacific coast of South America, attacking Spanish ports and pillaging towns. Some Spanish ships were captured, and Drake used their more accurate charts. Before reaching the coast of Peru, Drake visited Mocha Island, where he was seriously injured by hostile Mapuche. Later he sacked the port of Valparaiso further north in Chile, where he also captured a ship full of Chilean wine. Capture of Spanish treasure ships. Near Lima, Drake captured a Spanish ship laden with 25,000 pesos of Peruvian gold, amounting in value to 37,000 ducats of Spanish money. Drake also discovered news of another ship, Nuestra C ± Hora de la Concepción, which was sailing west towards Manila. It would come to be called the Cayo Fuego. Drake gave chase and eventually captured the treasure ship, which proved his most profitable capture. Aboard Nuestra C ± Hora de la Concepción, Drake found 80 lb of gold, a golden crucifix, jewels, 13 chests full of royals of plate and 26 tons of silver. Drake was naturally pleased at his good luck in capturing the galleon, and he showed it by dining with the captured ship's officers and gentlemen passengers. He offloaded his captives a short time later, and gave each one gifts appropriate to their rank, as well as a letter of safe conduct. Coast of California, Nova Albion. After looting the Cape Fuego, Drake turned north, hoping to meet another Spanish treasure ship coming south on its return from Manila to Acapulco. Although he failed to find a treasure ship, Drake reputedly sailed as far north as the 38th parallel, landing on the coast of California on June 17, 1579. He found a good port, landed, repaired and restocked his vessels, then stayed for a time, keeping friendly relations with the Coast Miwok natives. He claimed the land in the name of the Holy Trinity for the English crown, called Nova Albiona Euro-Latin for New Britain. Assertions that he left some of his men behind as an embryo colony are founded on the reduced number who were with him in the Moluccas. The precise location of the port was carefully guarded to keep it secret from the Spaniards, and several of Drake's maps may have been altered to this end. All first-hand records from the voyage, including logs, paintings and charts, were lost when Whitehall Palace burned in 1698. A bronze plaque inscribed with Drake's claim to the new lands Drake's plate of brass fitting the description in his account, was discovered in Marin County, California but was later declared a hoax. Now a National Historic Landmark, the officially recognized location of Drake's New Albion is Drake's Bay, California. Across the Pacific and around Africa, Drake left the Pacific coast, heading southwest to catch the winds that would carry his ship across the Pacific, and a few months later reached the Moluccas, a group of islands in the southwest Pacific, in eastern modern-day Indonesia. While there, Golden Hind became caught on a reef and was almost lost. After the sailors waited 3 days for expedient tides and dumped cargo, they freed the bark. Befriending a Sultan King of the Moluccas, Drake and his men became involved in some intrigues with the Portuguese there. He made multiple stops on his way towards the tip of Africa, eventually rounded the Cape of Good Hope, and reached Sierra Leone by July 22, 1580. Returned to Plymouth. On September 26, Golden Hind sailed into Plymouth with Drake and 59 remaining crew aboard, along with a rich cargo of spices and captured Spanish treasures. The Queen's half share of the cargo surpassed the rest of the Crown's income for that entire year. Drake was hailed as the first Englishman to circumnavigate the earth. The Queen declared that all written accounts of Drake's voyages were to become the Queen's secrets of the realm, and Drake and the other participants of his voyages on the pain of death sworn to their secrecy. She intended to keep Drake's activities away from the eyes of rival Spain. Drake presented the Queen with a jewel token commemorating the circumnavigation. Taken as a prize off the Pacific coast of Mexico, it was made of enamel gold and bore an African diamond and a ship with an ebony hull. For her part, the Queen gave Drake a jewel with her portrait, an unusual gift to bestow upon a commoner, and one that Drake sported proudly in his 1591 portrait by Marcus Geerarts now at the National Maritime Museum, Greenwich. On one side is a state portrait of Elizabeth by the miniaturist Nicholas Hilliard, on the other a sardonyx cameo of double portrait busts, a regal woman and an African male. The Drake jewel, as it is known today, is a rare documented survivor among 16th-century jewels. It is conserved at the Victoria and Albert Museum, London. Award of Knighthood. Queen Elizabeth awarded Drake a knighthood aboard Golden Hind in Deptford on April 4, 1581. The dubbing being performed by a French diplomat, Monsieur de Marcourmont, who was negotiating for Elizabeth to marry the King of France's brother, Francis, Duke of Anjou. By getting the French diplomat involved in the knighting, Elizabeth was gaining the implicit political support of the French for Drake's actions. During the Victorian era, in a spirit of nationalism, the story was promoted that Elizabeth I had done the knighting. Award of Arms. After receiving his knighthood, Drake unilaterally adopted the armorials of the ancient Devon family of Drake of Ash, near Musbury, to whom he claimed a distant but unspecified kinship. These arms were, argent, a wyvern wings displayed and tail-nailed gules, and the crest, a dexter arm proper grasping a battle-axe sable, headed argent. The head of that family, also a distinguished sailor, Sir Bernard Drake, angrily refuted Sir Francis's claimed kinship and his right to bear his family's arms. That dispute led to a box in the ear being given to Sir Francis by Sir Bernard at court, as recorded by John Prince in his Worthies of Devon. Queen Elizabeth, to assuage matters, awarded Sir Francis his own coat of arms, blazoned as follows: Sable FS wavy between two pole stars, Arctic and Antarctic argent. And for his crest, a ship on a globe under ruff, held by a cable with a hand out of the clouds. Over it this motto, Auxilio Divino. Underneath, Sic Parvis Magna. In the rigging whereof is hung up by the heels a wyvern, gules, which was the arms of Sir Bernard Drake. The above is considered by students of heraldry to be an early example of debased arms due to their over-complexity, particularly as regards the crest. The motto, Sic Parvis Magna, translated literally, is, thus great things from small things. The hand out of the clouds, labeled Auxilio Divino, means with divine help. The full achievement is depicted in the form of a large coloured plaster overmantel in the Lifetimes Gallery at Buckland Abbey. Nevertheless, Drake continued to quarter his new arms with the wyvern gules. The arms adopted by his nephew Sir Francis Drake, 1st Baronet of Buckland, were the arms of Drake of Ash, but the wyvern without a knout tail. Political career: in September 1581, Drake became the Mayor of Plymouth, and was a Member of Parliament in 1581, for an unknown constituency, and again in 1584 for Bossiney in Plymouth in 1593. Purchase of Buckland Abbey: in 1580 Drake purchased Buckland Abbey via intermediaries from Sir Richard Greenville, hiding who was actually purchasing the Abbey, a large manor house near Elizabethan in Devon, from Sir Richard. He lived there for 15 years, until his final voyage, and it remained in his family for several generations. Buckland Abbey is now in the care of the National Trust, and a number of mementos of his life are displayed there. Great Expedition: war had already been declared by Philip II after the Treaty of Nonsuch, so the Queen through Francis Walsingham ordered Sir Francis Drake to lead an expedition to attack the Spanish colonies in a kind of preemptive strike. An expedition left Plymouth in September 1585 with Drake in command of 21 ships with 1,800 soldiers under Christopher Carleal. He first attacked Vigo in Spain and held the place for 2 weeks, ransoming supplies. He then plundered Santiago in the Cape Verde Islands, after which the fleet then sailed across the Atlantic, sacked the port of Santo Domingo and captured the city of Cartagena de Indias in present-day Colombia. On June 6, 1586, during the return leg of the voyage, he raided the Spanish fort of San Augusto in Spanish Florida. After the raids he then went on to find Sir Walter Raleigh's settlement much further north at Roanoke, which he replenished and also took back with him all of the original colonists before Sir Richard Greenville arrived with supplies and more colonists. He finally reached England on July 22, when he sailed into Portsmouth, England to heroes' welcome. Spanish Armada. Encouraged by these acts, Philip II ordered a planned invasion of England. Cadiz raid. In another preemptive strike, Drake singed the beard of the King of Spain in 1587 by sailing a fleet into Cadiz and also Corunna, two of Spain's main ports, and occupied the harbours. He destroyed 37 naval and merchant ships. The attack delayed the Spanish invasion by a year. Over the next month, Drake patrolled the Iberian coasts between Lisbon and Cape St. Vincent, intercepting and destroying ships on the Spanish supply lines. Drake estimated that he captured around 1,600 €1,700 tons of barrel staves, enough to make 25,000 to 30,000 barrels for containing provisions. Defeat of the Spanish Armada. Drake was vice admiral in command of the English fleet when it overcame the Spanish Armada that was attempting to invade England in 1588. As the English fleet pursued the Armada up the English Channel in closing darkness, Drake broke off and captured the Spanish galleon Rosario, along with Admiral Pedro de Valdecoppierites and all his crew. The Spanish ship was known to be carrying substantial funds to pay the Spanish army in the Low Countries. Drake's ship had been leading the English pursuit of the Armada by means of a lantern. By extinguishing this for the capture, Drake put the fleet into disarray overnight. On the night of July 29, along with Howard, Drake organized fireships, causing the majority of the Spanish captains to break formation and sail out of Calais into the open sea. The next day, Drake was present at the Battle of Gravelines. He wrote as follows to Admiral Henry Seymour after coming upon part of the Spanish Armada: whilst aboard Revenge on July 31, 1588. Coming up to them, there has passed some common shot between some of our fleet and some of them. And as far as we perceive, they are determined to sell their lives with blows. The most famous anecdote about Drake relates that, prior to the battle, he was playing a game of bowls on Plymouth Hoe. On being warned of the approach of the Spanish fleet, Drake is said to have remarked that there was plenty of time to finish the game and still beat the Spaniards. There is no known eyewitness account of this incident, and the earliest retelling of it was printed 37 years later. Adverse winds and currents caused some delay in the launching of the English fleet as the Spanish drew nearer, perhaps prompting a popular myth of Drake's cavalier attitude to the Spanish threat. Drake-Norris expedition. In 1589, the year after defeating the Armada, Drake and Sir John Norris were given 3 tasks. They were ordered to first seek out and destroy the remaining ships, second they were to support the rebels in Lisbon, Portugal against King Philip II, and third they were to take the Azores if possible. Drake and Norris destroyed a few ships in the harbour of A Coruña ± in Spain, but lost more than 12,000 lives and 20 ships. This delayed Drake, and he was forced to forego hunting the rest of the surviving ships and head on to Lisbon. Final years. Drake's seafaring career continued into his mid-50s. In 1595, he failed to conquer the port of Las Palmas, and following a disastrous campaign against Spanish America, where he suffered a number of defeats, he unsuccessfully attacked San Juan de Puerto Rico, eventually losing the Battle of San Juan. The Spanish gunners from Almora Castle shot a cannonball through the cabin of Drake's flagship, and he survived. But a few weeks later, in January 1596, he died of dysentery when he was about 55, while anchored off the coast of Portobelo, Panama, where some Spanish treasure ships had sought shelter. Following his death, the English fleet withdrew. Before dying, he asked to be dressed in his full armour. He was buried at sea in a lead coffin, near Portobelo. Divers continue to search for the coffin. Cultural impact. In the UK there are various places named after him, especially in Plymouth, Devon, where various places carry his name, including the naval base, Drake's Island, and a roundabout named Drake Circus, along with a shopping mall named after the roundabout. Plymouth Hoe is also home to a statue of Drake. In the United States, Drake's Bay and Sir Francis Drake Boulevard of Marin County, California are both named after him, as well as the high school in San Anselmo, California. The boulevard runs between Drake's Bay at Point Reyes to Point San Quentin on San Francisco Bay. A large hotel in Union Square, San Francisco also bears his name. Additionally, the Sir Francis Drake Channel in the British Virgin Islands bears his name. In British Columbia, Canada, where some theorize he may also have landed to the north of the usual site considered to be Nova Albion, various mountains were named in the 1930s for him, or in connection with Elizabethan or other figures of that era, including Mount Sir Francis Drake, Mount Queen Bess, and the Golden Hind, the highest mountain on Vancouver Island. Drakesville was the focus of a vast confidence scheme which Oscar Hartzell perpetrated in the 1920s and 1930s. He convinced thousands of people, mostly in the American Midwest, that Drake's fortune was being held by the British government, and had compounded to a huge amount. If their last name was Drake, they might be eligible for a share if they paid Hartzell to be their agent. The swindle continued until a copy of Drakesville was brought to Hartzell's mail fraud trial and he was convicted and imprisoned. Modern workings of stories involving Drake include the 1961 British television series Sir Francis Drake, and the 2009 US television movie The Immortal Voyage of Captain Drake. In 2003, he was the namesake of the Drake tribe and survivor, Pearl Islands. Drake's execution of Thomas Doughty is the subject of Robert E. Howard's Solomon Kane poem, The One Black Stain. Nathan Drake, a fictional descendant of Sir Francis Drake, searches for lost treasure supposedly found by Sir Francis during his circumnavigation in the video game Uncharted, Drake's Fortune, and again in Uncharted 3, Drake's Deception. Controversies. Slave trading. Drake accompanied his second cousin Sir John Hawkins in making the third English slave trading expeditions, making fortunes through the abduction and transportation of West African people, and then exchanging them for high-value goods. The first Englishman recorded to have taken slaves from Africa was John Locke, a London trader who, in 1555, brought to England 5 slaves from Guinea. A second London trader taking slaves at the time was William Towson, whose fleet sailed into Plymouth following his 1556 voyage to Africa and from Plymouth on his 1557 voyage. Despite the exploits of Locke and Towson, John Hawkins of Plymouth is widely acknowledged to be an early pioneer of the English slave trade. While Hawkins made only 3 such trips, ultimately the English were to dominate the trade. Around 1563 Drake first sailed west to the Spanish Main, on a ship owned and commanded by John Hawkins, with a cargo of people forcibly removed from the coast of West Africa. The Englishmen sold their African captives into slavery in Spanish plantations. In general, the kidnapping and forced transportation of people was considered to be a criminal offence under English law at the time, although legal protection did not extend to slaves, non-Protestants or criminals. Hawkins' own account of his actions cites 2 sources for their victims. One was military attacks on African towns and villages, the other was attacking Portuguese slave ships. Conflict in the Caribbean. During his early days as a slave trader, Drake took an immediate dislike to the Spanish, at least in part due to their Catholicism and inherent distrust of non-Spanish. His hostility is said to have increased over an incident at San Juan de Ulloa in 1568, when Drake was sailing with the fleet of his second cousin John Hawkins. Whilst negotiating to resupply and repair at the Spanish port, the fleet were attacked by Spanish warships, with all but 2 of the English ships lost. Drake survived the attack by swimming. The most celebrated of Drake's adventures along the Spanish Main was his capture of the Spanish silver train at Nombre de Dios in March 1573. With a crew including many French privateers and maroons Euro-African slaves who had escaped the Spanish Drake raided the waters around Darien and tracked the silver train to the nearby port of Nombre de Dios. He made off with a fortune in gold, but had to leave behind another fortune in silver, because it was too heavy to carry back to England. It was during this expedition that he climbed a high tree in the central mountains of the Isthmus of Panama and thus became the first Englishman to see the Pacific Ocean. He remarked as he saw it that he hoped one day an Englishman would be able to sail to Euro, which he would do years later as part of his circumnavigation of the world. When Drake returned to Plymouth after the raids, the government signed a temporary truce with King Philip II of Spain and so was unable to acknowledge Drake's accomplishment officially. Drake was considered a hero in England and a pirate in Spain for his raids. Ireland. In 1575, Drake was present at the Rathlin Massacre, which was a part of the English plantation effort in Ulster, where 600 men, women, and children were massacred after surrendering. Francis Drake was in charge of the ships which transported John Norris' troops to Rathlin Island, commanding a small frigate called Falcon, with a total complement of 25. At the time of the massacre, he was charged with the task of keeping Scottish vessels from bringing reinforcements to Rathlin Island. The people who were massacred were, in fact, the families of Solly Boy MacDonald's followers. Execution of Thomas Doughty. On his voyage to interfere with Spanish treasure fleets, Drake had several quarrels with his co-commander Thomas Doughty and on June 3, 1578, accused him of witchcraft and charged him with mutiny and treason in a shipboard trial. Drake claimed to have a commission from the Queen to carry out such acts and denied Doughty a trial in England. The main pieces of evidence against Doughty were the testimony of the ship's carpenter, Edward Bright, who after the trial was promoted to master of the ship Marigold, and Doughty's admission of telling Lord William Burghley, a vocal opponent of agitating the Spanish, of the intent of the voyage. Drake consented to his request of communion and dined with him, of which Francis Fletcher had this strange account. And after this holy repast, they dined also at the same table together, as cheerfully, in sobriety, as ever in their lives they had done aforetime, each cheering up the other, and taking their leave, by drinking each to other, as if some journey only had been in hand. Drake had Thomas Doughty beheaded on July 2, 1578. When the ship's chaplain Francis Fletcher in a sermon suggested that the woes of the voyage in January 1580 were connected to the unjust demise of Doughty, Drake chained the clergyman to a hatch cover and pronounced him excommunicated. See also, Drake in California, Drake's Leet, a water supply for Plymouth, promoted by Drake, Francis William Drake, relative of Sir Francis Drake, Giovanni Battista Bozio, Drake's Mamorca. References. Bibliography, BAWLF, Samuel The Secret Voyage of Sir Francis Drake, 1577 a Euro 1580 Walker and Company ISBN 0-8027-1405-6, Corbett, Julian Stafford 1890. Sir Francis Drake, Hughes Hallett, Lucy Heroes, A History of Hero Worship Alfred A. Knopf, New York. ISBN 1-4000-4399-9, Kelsey, Harry. Sir Francis Drake, The Queen's Pirate, New Haven, Connecticut, Yale University Press. ISBN 0-300-07182-5, Kelsey, Harry. Drake, Sir Francis. Oxford Dictionary of National Biography. Oxford University Press. doi, 10.10938022. Retrieved May 20, 2011. Mattingly, Garrett. The Defeat of the Spanish Armada. ISBN 0-395-08366-4 Euro. A detailed account of the defeat of the Spanish Armada, which received a special citation from the Pulitzer Prize Committee in 1960. Meredith, Mrs. Charles, Notes and Sketches of New South Wales, during a residence in that colony from 1839 to 1844. Bound with, Life of Drake by John Barrow, Zi, 164. And Xi, 187 pp. Respectively. Payne, Edward John, Voyages of the Elizabethan Seamen to America, Roger, N.A.M. The Safeguard of the Sea. A Naval History of Britain 660 a Euro 1649, Wilson, Derek. The World Encompassed, Drake's Great Voyage, 1577 a Euro 80. Harper and Row. ISBN 0-06-014679-6, external links, The Circumnavigation, Google Earth Tour of Drake's Circumnavigation, Lesson Plans for Classroom Use. General Sites, Francis Drake at Spartacus Educational, hand-colored map depicting Sir Francis Drake's attack on St. Augustine from the State Archives of Florida, In Drake's Wake a Euro. The World's Best Drake Resource, Krauss Collection of Sir Francis Drake at the Library of Congress, Sir Francis Drake, a pictorial biography by Hans P. Krauss from the collections at the Library of Congress, Mission to Rescue Drake's Body, Oliver Seeler's website. Sir Francis Drake, Drake's Methods of Navigation. Encyclopedias, A Drake, Francis. New International Encyclopedia 1905a, A Drake, Sir Francis. Collier's New Encyclopedia 1921a.